7:45 a.m., July 22, 2025, 220 nautical miles southeast of Hainan. What began as a calm morning in the South China Sea shattered in seconds. The first indicators appeared on fleet screens, hypersonic missile warnings, the kind no sailor ever wants to see. These were not practice drills or shadow contacts. They were live threats, and the speed alone told every watch officer what they were facing. The incoming weapons closed at Mach 10, several thousand miles per hour, capable of covering roughly 1,500 kilometers in under 12 minutes. The carrier strike group that symbolized untouchable power had just been placed under real, immediate threat. China's opening move was measured and deliberate. 4 YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship missiles launched from long-range platforms outside the fleet's strike envelope and bore down on the Gerald R. Ford strike group. Each missile, more than 8 tons of steel and fuel, carried the destructive force to cripple even a major warship. At the same time, 2 J-20 stealth fighters advanced, exploiting gaps in radar coverage and forcing the Americans to split their focus between defending against the hypersonics and tracking low observable jets. In just seconds, the battle shifted from deterrence to survival. The first response from the fleet was automatic. Aegis combat systems lit up with plotted intercept paths, firing solutions, and countdowns. SM-6 interceptors, the Navy's fastest defensive missiles, launched in pairs. Intercepting hypersonic weapons is extremely difficult. The fleet's Aegis/SM-6 system successfully intercepted some warheads, but not all. Data feeds confirmed that 2 YJ-21s were destroyed mid-flight, but 2 others broke through. The surviving warheads slammed into the escorts guarding Ford. The USS Mason, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, absorbed a strike on its forward section. 7 sailors were hurt as blast overpressure tore through compartments, ignited fires, and scattered fragments across the deck. Nearby, the USS Lake Champlain, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, suffered a direct hit that buckled plating and left thick black smoke pouring from its midsection. Both crews scrambled to seal off flames, douse fires, and stabilize their ships. The sight of 2 U.S. surface combatants bleeding smoke into the South China Sea made one fact undeniable. Missile defenses had held the line partially, but not completely. While these missiles caused damage and injuries, the threat was not over. The J-20S pressed in closer than expected, slipping into radar gaps while the fleet focused on missile defense. Low observable design and electronic deception allowed the Chinese fighters to advance with unnerving proximity. For commanders accustomed to layered coverage, this moment was a jarring reminder that even the best detection systems could be stretched thin when attacks came from multiple directions. Yet the J-20S did not achieve a decisive kill. The Gerald R. Ford itself remained untouched, its systems unbroken, its deck crews at full readiness. Symbolically, the attack mattered more than the immediate tactical result. For the first time in decades, American sailors were wounded at sea by Chinese weapons. The impact resonated beyond the blast scars on the Mason and Lake Champlain. To Beijing's state media, this was proof that the U.S. carrier group could be bloodied, a televised moment to assert that China's reach extended to the heart of American sea power. To Washington, it framed an urgent test of credibility. Allies watched to see if resolve would hold under fire. Adversaries speculated on whether the aura of U.S. dominance had dimmed. Aboard Ford, the tone was not one of panic, but of cold determination. Officers on deck shifted immediately from defense to counterattack planning. Damage reports were logged, but attention turned almost instantly toward recovery of initiative. The carrier group had been surprised, but not neutralized. Gerald R. Ford remained intact, her catapults primed, her air wing poised. The strike group's central asset, the ability to project power across hundreds of miles, was still fully available. China's opening strike achieved shock, but not its intended decisive effect. The fleet had taken wounds, suffered losses, and been forced to confront its own vulnerability in real time. But the core of U.S. naval power was unbroken. For commanders gathered in combat information centers, the calculus shifted quickly from defense to offense. They understood the danger of lingering too long in a defensive posture. The next steps would define whether this engagement remained a temporary blow to morale or turned into a moment of strategic reversal. The decision was made above deck, not in the scorched compartments of Mason or Lake Champlain. Within minutes of impact, flight operations teams rushed to execute a plan that had been drilled countless times. China had fired missiles and declared victory in headlines, but the commander of Ford's Air Wing saw the battlefield in transition. The question was now clear: how to strike hard, fast, and unexpectedly. And that answer would not begin with fighters or heavyweight missiles. For what came next upended traditional expectations of how a supercarrier projects force. It began with something smaller, cheaper, and far more disruptive. How do you dismantle a fortress worth billions with weapons that cost thousands? The answer came quickly and decisively: drones. Within minutes of the Chinese strike, deck crews prepared and launched a swarm of 100 unmanned systems, divided into two distinct waves. 50 RQ-21 Blackjacks carried electronic warfare payloads designed to blind and disrupt, while 50 Switchblade 600 loitering munitions carried the destructive force to tear open defensive positions. Their launch marked the first moment the initiative shifted.
The first beat of this assault unfolded with the RQ-21 Blackjacks. Barely 16 feet across, they carried no bombs, only electronic warfare suites. Their purpose was simple: make the enemy unable to see. As they fanned out over the South China Sea, the Blackjacks flooded Chinese radar networks with interference. Screens inside command posts filled with ghost returns and phantom squadrons that multiplied at impossible speeds. Operators tried to distinguish what was real, but the clutter destabilized their picture of the battle space. Key radar arrays became unreliable, and at least one HQ-9 long-range battery lost lock altogether. For air defense crews who depended on those radars, the sudden confusion felt like blindness.
The impact of that blindness did not require hours, it required only minutes. Once the Blackjacks had saturated the spectrum, commanders inside hardened bunkers no longer trusted their instruments. Targets froze, multiplied, or disappeared in unpredictable bursts of static. Coordination faltered. In that space of doubt, commanders on board the Ford strike group knew their opening had arrived. The second beat began as the Switchblade 600s closed in. Each loitering munition, less than 6 feet long, carried a 30-pound anti-armor charge designed to plunge into hardened positions. Unlike missiles, they could circle above the battle space for extended periods, silent until commanded to strike. Now, with Chinese radars reeling, the Switchblades swept forward in numbers greater than the active aircraft of many national air forces. Even when Chinese gunners managed to cut down 20 drones, 30 still pressed through the fire barrier. One by one, they dove onto radar dishes, antenna arrays, and missile launchers exposed by the confusion. Explosions bloomed across the outer perimeter, ripping apart HQ-9 batteries and igniting fuel caches. The economics of this exchange sharpened the blow. Each Switchblade cost just $70,000. Yet to bring them down, Chinese defenses fired over 40 interceptor missiles with a combined value of nearly $100 million. The math was one-sided. For every $1 million spent in defense, America lost only thousands. A handful of low-cost drones forced the depletion of stockpiles designed to counter advanced cruise missiles or stealth jets. The balance of cost to effect was no longer theoretical. It was visible in real time as billion-dollar fortifications were picked apart by weapons valued in what, for this battlefield, amounted to spare change. The third beat came as the two waves worked in tandem. The Blackjacks continued their electronic assault, saturating radar systems to delay recovery and extend the window of confusion. Meanwhile, Switchblades created very real craters where missile tubes and radar pylons had stood minutes earlier. Chinese crews scrambled to reset their systems, but each attempt failed inside the electronic fog. Every lost launcher or fried dish multiplied vulnerability across the defensive grid. The once dense network began to resemble Swiss cheese, riddled with gaps that no quick patch could close. By the end of the drone storm, the transformation was stark. China's most advanced Fortress South garrison sat with critical radars crippled, several HQ-9 launchers destroyed, and fuel reserves burning. Interceptors had been wasted on drones that cost pennies per dollar of defense. The swarm had not ended the fight by itself, but it had tilted the terms irreversibly. What looked impregnable 3 hours earlier now looked fractured, exposed, and vulnerable to the blows that would follow. And that raised the central question for commanders. With the fortress reeling and its eyes taken away, what weapons would now drive home the counterstrike? And how fast could they erase a $10 billion stronghold? The counterstrike came with precision and weight. From the deck of the USS Gerald R. 10 F-35C, Lightning II and 5 FA-18E Super Hornets, launched in a tightly choreographed sequence, carrying more than 150,000 pounds of ordnance in the opening wave. Their task was not random destruction, but carefully layered strikes, stealth aircraft to break hardened defenses, followed by heavier fighters to collapse the infrastructure beneath. Every second of timing was calculated, ensuring that suppression, targeting, and impact flowed in unbroken order across the target zone. The F-35s led the formation. Operating under stealth profiles, they slipped past lingering gaps in radar coverage. Each Lightning II carried multiple Joint Direct Attack Munitions, JDAMS, including GBU-31 precision bombs, designed to penetrate bunkers and command shelters. Using GPS guidance, pilots released their payloads from attack altitude, sending weapons onto exact coordinate grids. From above, the paths looked like cold streaks of light. On impact, penetrator fuses allowed the bombs to punch through reinforced layers before detonating. Inside the fortress, missile storage cells and hardened command posts meant to withstand heavy assault were cracked open in seconds. Meanwhile, operators inside the base tried to mount a defense with HQ-9 surface-to-air batteries. In theory, these systems were the final safeguard, able to intercept aircraft at long range. But the earlier electronic disruptions still distorted their targeting. Screens showed unstable tracks, missile guidance loops broke at launch, and defensive salvos wandered off course. Several interceptors spiraled harmlessly into the sky, leaving the base exposed. The frustration among Chinese crews became evident. Their most advanced shield had been reduced to guesswork. As the first JDAMS detonated, cascading explosions shook the facility. Buried fuel reserves ignited, amplifying fireballs with violent overpressure. Missile depots erupted, secondary blasts kicking upward in thick columns of flame visible across the coastline. Amid the chaos, the F-35Cs pulled sharply and exited combat space, their strikes complete. In the vacuum they left, the Super Hornets arrived. The FA-18Es carried specialized bunker buster munitions engineered to collapse underground storage vaults. These weapons used delayed fuses to burrow deeper into structures before detonation, maximizing damage against ammunition bunkers and protective vaults. With each strike, reinforced chambers caved inward. Ammunition magazines erupted in uncontrolled sequences, fire spilling through tunnels and storage lines. Offshore observers reported plumes so tall they registered on satellite feeds within minutes, a clear sign that the chain reactions were consuming thousands of tons of stored material. The destruction multiplied rapidly. Fuel depots burst into infernos, shelters folded into burning craters, and coastal positions glowed red against the water. What moments earlier appeared as one of Asia's most hardened fortress bases became a series of linked detonation points, each catastrophe feeding the next. Analysts later confirmed that secondary blasts, rather than the initial bombs, caused the majority of the devastation. Fuel chains and ammunition stores acted as amplifiers, transforming precision strikes into towering infernos. The results were quantifiable. At the PLA's tank complex near Guangga, researchers report that more than 70 Type 99 main battle tanks were destroyed outright, with another 30 left crippled or beyond immediate repair. In financial terms, roughly $2.5 billion in armored forces were wiped out at that site alone. Combined with destroyed infrastructure, missile stockpiles, and support facilities, losses exceeded $10 billion. The comparative American toll remained steady: 2 escorts damaged, 7 sailors injured, but the Ford strike group still fully operational and combat-ready. The pace of the engagement revealed something deeper. Drone swarms were launched near 9 a.m., buying the window for manned aircraft to follow. Between 9:20 and 9:40 a.m., the strike fighters entered target range. By approximately 10:05 a.m., the primary base and its armored reserve were non-operational. In little more than an hour, a massive installation, years in the making, had been rendered unusable as a hub of power projection. Numbers alone, however, did not tell the entire story. This was not just tactical damage but symbolic reversal. What Beijing had presented as evidence of American vulnerability was eclipsed almost instantly by catastrophic losses on their own side. In practical terms, the counterstrike swapped a single symbolic success for overwhelming material and morale defeat. UAVs circling over the battlefield broadcasted flames and destruction live, images that traveled across global networks in real time. Allies saw American resilience validated. Adversaries saw the price of underestimating US capabilities. As the inferno receded and commanders tallied results, one fact stood out: resilience and precision together defined the battle's outcome. The US Navy had absorbed a first strike, adapted, and returned a blow that redefined the balance in minutes. And it was this adaptability, not simply the size of the fleet, that shaped the course of the fight. Over the space of the counterstrike, roughly an hour from the first drone wave to the collapse of Guanga's defenses, a $10 billion installation was effectively neutralized. What at first looked like a decisive blow against the Ford strike group instead became proof of two enduring lessons. First, resilience. Even after sustaining damage, the carrier group retained full operational capacity and projected power. Second, economics. Low-cost drones drained defenses worth hundreds of millions, exposing how asymmetry shapes modern battlefields.
If you want more technical breakdowns of modern naval air power, like and subscribe, and tell us below which system surprised you most.